Good morning and welcome back on the Buckeye Breakdown podcast after Ohio State yesterday knocked off Tulsa by a final score of 41-20. Had a chance to sleep on our initial reactions, and now time to give you a little bit more deeper analysis of the Buckeyes' second win in their third game of the season. Alongside Tommy Zagorski, former college football coach for over 12 years. I'm Brendan Gulick. Coach, this was a game that, I'll be honest, I feel like may have left a few more questions than answers after thinking about things last night. Obviously, a couple of really impressive highlights. Travion Henderson stealing the show in many regards in that way. And it was good to see the Buckeyes get back on a winning track. But by the same token, there were a number of moments yesterday that I think kind of left everybody scratching their head, wondering exactly how high the ceiling is for this team. And that's not a place we're typically at here at this point of the year, month of September.
Yeah, Brennan, it's a tough one to wrap your mind around. It's a victory Sunday. Happy Victory Sunday. 25th Sunday in ordinary time. A lot of good things going on in the real world. But and the Buckeyes won. They're 2-1, but it does leave a lot to be desired. The fans came in yesterday to see a Tulsa team that's 0-2 that has an FCS loss and a loss to Oklahoma State, and kind of expected Ohio State to get a little bit more aggressive early. And that's where kind of I know where I had on my prediction on Friday. I really expected Tulsa to score a couple times like they did, but I really thought the offense would kind of take off. And it did in the run game, but what was left to be a little bit desired was CJ Stroud's performance at quarterback yesterday. He looked uncomfortable. He did not look with that second half rush that we've seen with him, where he just kind of surges and makes some big time plays. Those didn't happen yesterday, and that leaves a lot to be concerned. And then on the defensive side of the football, from the defensive line perspective, I don't feel like we played in the backfield a lot yesterday. It was something that was a little tough to see. The Buckeyes did a good job of trying to transition to a lot of different stunts and angles and different ways of trying to play out of gaps. But it's not who Ohio State traditionally is. A lot of times in the past, we've had incredible 4-man rush groups that you could just let them go eat. And right now, that's not the case. There's not that guy that's got that Wolverine trait that's just going to go back there and go do something for you. So right now, it's going to be going back to the drawing board, trying to figure out as this defensive line how they can generate pressure, because the secondary, yesterday to hemorrhage that many passing yards against a mid-major team is tough to swallow. But I like you and I talked off air. I think our cornerbacks played a solid game, and they tried to take a little bit more off the safeties with a lot of the zone stuff that they did. They gave up yards, but they didn't give up that big play, which is encouraging. And Matt Barnes, credit to him, getting his first play calling responsibility for the Buckeyes. I thought he called a good game. He tried to get pressure by getting the linebackers involved, but then sometimes it opened up a couple gaps in different aspects of the game. So there's no perfect defense. There's no perfect way. It is an offensively driven sport, and I think if Ohio State gives up, 17 points yesterday or 20 points yesterday, and then comes back and scores in the 50s, then you really get excited about where kind of this team's, going with in that direction. I talked about it on Friday. Cold-blooded execution you wanted to see offensively. In the run game, that is what you saw. You saw an offensive line that leaned on people and dominated them after losing the leader Thayer Munford early in the game. It was good to see Matt Jones pop in, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then obviously the historic performance by Travion Henderson was really exciting to see. Buckeye fans were watching something very, very special in the backfield with that young man.
There's a lot of places we could start, but maybe the defensive line is the most important place. I feel like in reflecting on Ohio State's 3 games so far this season, we've seen some individual performances that have been pretty good. JT Tuimoloau, I think, has looked pretty darn good for being a true freshman. Jack Sawyer doesn't have a sack yet, but he's drawn a couple of holding calls, and he's really been tough to defend. Tyleik Williams, I thought, had the biggest play of the game that didn't involve a score yesterday with that huge sack. Lost 17 yards for Tulsa in the fourth quarter when they were, starting to put together potentially a game-tying drive. And yet, to your point, I guess we're just so used to seeing Ohio State's defensive line utterly dominate their opposition. I mean, the Buckeyes they don't get pushed around a lot historically. And I don't know if they're getting pushed around as much as they're just not penetrating. They're not, they're not getting the leverage to blow plays up in the backfield repeatedly. Davis Brin the whole first half yesterday for Tulsa, I felt like his clock wasn't sped up. Now, to Ohio State's credit, the second half, Brin had to get it moving a little bit better. He still threw for 428 yards. The defense still gave up 500 yards to Tulsa. So it's a work in progress. But when you look at the defensive line, just in general, I'm not talking about necessarily Ohio State's specific defensive line, but philosophically, how difficult is it on your defense as a whole to be effective when maybe at the line of scrimmage, you're not as strong as you're used to being?
Across the board. I mean, for the first time that anyone talks about this sport, and I'm biased because I played on both sides of the football, but realistically, it's important that you have an offensive line and a defensive line. That's where it starts. That's where, you go when coaches hire their hires and they go make those hires. A lot of times in those interview processes, they're going to ask you, who's coaching your offensive line? Who's coaching your defensive line? And that's really, really important to make sure you have the right guys up front in that elixir. And that's where, as an offensive line or a defensive line, you have to be the one that sets the tone. If the defensive line is not performing their ability, nobody else can do it. They're the foundation of your defense. When you build a home, you can't just build a home by starting to build the attic. You have to build at the foundation, and your foundation has to be your defensive line. Ohio State fans have gotten accustomed to eating at Fleming's, at Ruth Chris, and whatever elaborate steakhouse you want to eat at. Right now, it's kind of an Applebee's Chili's deal, and it's they're going to put a lot of other stuff on it to kind of doctor it up, and that's what they're trying to do. They're running a lot of stunts. They're running a lot of angles. They're trying to figure this thing out as they're going. But JTT is going to be elite, and he is a true freshman. And what I mean by true freshman, Jack Sawyer's been committed to Ohio State, I think, since he was in 7th grade. And Jack knew he was coming. He didn't even play his senior year of high school at Pickerington North. JTT did not get on campus until July. And people don't understand how important that is in this game now. High school kids are graduating in the fall. They're coming in and they're enrolling in Ohio State in January. That's 6 months that he doesn't get with legendary Larry Johnson. Until he gets that time with him, this kid's really playing truly right behind. I mean, he's really a true freshman, and he didn't have a spring football. He didn't have the ability to get the install, to do different things. He was still being recruited. He sat out and waited on that. And he's obviously a tremendous athlete to be able to be picked up on the basketball team as well. But I really think there's something special there. He's got the ability to do that going forward. He's going to be the guy you're going to build off of, and those young guys. But right now they're not there, and he's not going to be there because he just doesn't have the time. He doesn't have the experience. It was also good, Brendan. We didn't admit this, but Tariq Smith to get a holding penalty. It was good to see him do that. The one disadvantage, I think, and I think they'll talk about this in the film, he's rushing a lot down Main Street. And what I mean by that is he's going, as an old line guy, I always said that whenever a guy tried to rush through you on a pass rush, put him on your Christmas card list because he's making life way easier. When you attack half the man or whatever, you're going to work on that angle to set your next move up. Right now, he's kind of being a block magnet where he's running right down the middle of those guys. And I know they're going to get that corrected. I mean, literally, I can't say enough great things about Larry Johnson. He is one of the greatest defensive line coaches in the history of college football. And he's got a young group. He doesn't have those seasoned guys. And Harrison's had the back issue that probably explains a lot of why he has not been as explosive as we anticipate him being. Because he looks like he was sculpted by the Greek gods when he walks into the locker room. But he's going to be somebody that hopefully this back issue gets back, and it allows teams to not have to double team on the perimeter. They can just play normal protection across the board. So there'll be chips and nudges, like I said, on the edge to kind of help out against those defensive ends. But I think going forward, you're going to expect Ohio State with these young guys to be really, really talented up front, and to correlate to better play on the back end with the linebackers in the secondary.
Let's move to CJ Stroud here, who, I think last night we got off to a good start in the conversation around his play by essentially saying that, look, the kid clearly has some talent. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He seems to have a good attitude. I can't speak to his level of attention to detail in meetings and preparation, but he doesn't appear to me to be underprepared when he's out on the field. I think, though, that there are times that he looks like he's hesitating a little bit or maybe not processing the defense fast enough. I think he looks a little bit tentative to tuck it and run in certain situations. I know yesterday there was a play where, he had at least a 10-yard gain if he'd have kept the ball himself. Instead, as he rolls out to his right, he dumps it down for a gain of 5 or 6 to, I think it was Garrett Wilson, if I remember correctly. And I just wonder how much, even if it's subconscious, the shoulder thing, it's clearly bothering him. And look, he's not rolling out of the pocket thinking, okay, my shoulder hurts. What am I going to do? But when that's in your mind and you're trying to gut through an injury, I think there's some limitations there. Let's give him due credit. Through 3 games, he's thrown for almost 1,000 yards. He has more passing yards through 3 games than any quarterback in Ohio State history. Some of that is Ryan Day's offense and the nature of what college football's offense looks like. You're not going to see, some of the good quarterbacks of the past having thrown the ball as much as the Buckeyes have these last 10 years now. But CJ clearly has the ability to do that. Where it's a bit frustrating for me is there's something that doesn't feel right. I don't know how to really put my finger on it. And again, I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy or to say that I don't think he can be the guy. Ryan Day clearly likes him. You can see there are certain instances why it's obvious that he's got this opportunity. But I guess I just look at this and say in a world where you've got 2 other quarterbacks on the bench in Kyle McCord and Jack Miller, who are by all accounts ready to rock. One in Quinn Ewers, who has all of the hype and all the talent in the world. I don't know if Quinn is ready to compete at this level yet or not. He should be in high school still. But there are 2 and maybe 3 really, really good options behind CJ. I just feel like CJ won't back down from this, and I admire this about him. He probably understands that if he doesn't play because he's injured, it might be really difficult for him to win his job back. How challenging that is for the coaching staff to figure out where the line is between letting a guy be tough and play through it and progress versus, maybe not getting the most out of your offense. I don't know where to draw that line. But again, I just feel like there's been times where there's a little clunkiness. And before I let you run with this, Z, I also wonder if we're being fair in thinking about how we're measuring him, because, when you've got guys that just came before him that are quite literally a few of the best quarterbacks in the history of the program, there's a recency bias that your head can't get away from. You see what Justin Fields did. You see what Dwayne Haskins and JT Barrett did. You know what Braxton Miller's capability was when he was playing quarterback. These guys were elite. And it's just hard to see CJ Stroud in that light right now because it's just not all there. And maybe it could be, but it isn't yet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Brennan. And it comes back to the defensive line like we talked before. We Ohio State fans are accustomed to having 5-star dining, and right now it's a carry-out deal. And he's been really, really good in regards to like his mental progression. Yesterday, CJ was the first interception that I saw on film where he made a bad decision. The Rucker, on the up and over, he missed him on the crossing route there. Now Rucker could have flattened it out a little bit more, but he wanted to get behind that linebacker. Safety was sitting over the top. It wasn't a great decision for him to throw the football. He needs to have the ability to be able to make the decisions that are best for everybody that are on board. And CJ's going to fight through this because why? He's in a room with a lot of young guys as well. He's going to put in all the mental prep work that he can possibly put in to make sure he wins over his quarterback coach and his offensive coordinator and head coach. And when he does that, he doesn't want to be Wally Pipp. And I know that analogy for a lot of people nowadays. They look at who's Wally Pipp, the Lou Gehrig story. If you don't know that, younger guys, think of this: Tom Brady and Drew Bledsoe. Drew Bledsoe was the first overall pick in the NFL draft, led a team to the Super Bowl, and then eventually had this Tom Brady guy come in and take over. And I'm not saying that Tom Brady's is one of these backup guys, but CJ understands the pressure of college football. It's win now and play now, whatever that hot hand is. And there are times in practice where you get reps with those 2s and 3s. And if those guys are the guys that have to have it, those are the guys that they're going to go and call upon on Saturday. And I have to imagine that CJ is doing everything right in the facility Monday through Friday. He's missing on some high throws, but like we said, he's 19 years old. He's thrown for over 1,000 yards in 3 weeks, which is a remarkable stat.
I think it's not 963, but
yeah,
very close to it. Yeah.
Is he the guy going forward the Buckeyes need And Ohio State has missed before. I mean, we had a Heisman Trophy winner sitting in the quarterback room. They had to transfer down to Baton Rouge to be able to go actually throw the football. So, and part of that was a product of the system he was in, and that's when you look at it, Ryan Day has a tremendous track record of developing and finding quarterbacks. He sees something very special in this young man. He's going to continue to ride with them, and he's not going to waste the opportunity to have this incredible receiving core. But going forward, it's important that CJ settles down a little bit more, and maybe there is an opportunity. And yesterday, I think Buckeye fans were kind of hoping for the Buckeyes to jump out early and kind of pull away in that game to see somebody else under center, to Absolutely. See what's there. And, the coaches see plenty of that throughout the week, and they're going to put the right guy under center. But right now, CJ seems to be the guy the coaches are going with. I'm not saying that he's not the right guy, but it's important that he has the ability to really build the confidence of everyone around him. And I think Ryan Day's most important thing for him at quarterback is to keep this guy confident. Let the 19-year-old play. Go with him in the ebb and flow of different things that happen. There were times in Justin Fields' career where early he missed throws as well. I think we were a little bit more forgiving at that point. The Buckeyes are expecting CJ Stroud to win now. He's 2-1 as a starter. He's 19 years old. He's thrown for 960 plus yards. He's only thrown a couple interceptions, and those couple interceptions he's thrown, only one of them has really been a true mental error. He's developing mentally, and the patience for Buckeye fans, and they don't have it right now. And that's what happens when you log your room with a bunch of different freshmen to get in there. And then what happens is there's not the ability to move guys around as much as they probably could.
And I think it's a great point, because there's probably this panic meter with the fan base that it's so much different than what it is inside the building, frankly, where really it only matters. I think as fans, we are probably a bit more, ready and eager and willing to say, hey, put somebody else in. This doesn't look right, or this isn't working. Where, inside the building, you're right. They get a chance to see these guys practicing and their preparations and all that on a daily basis. So you have to trust your coaching staff, and let's give Ryan Day his credit. He's 25-3, and now 2+ years as a head coach, and 2 of those losses are in the college football playoff. It's not like the guy has no idea what he's doing, right? I mean, he is widely considered one of the best quarterback coaches in the country, if not the best. So sometimes you got to just trust him, but I also trust my eyes, and I know what I see. I'm wondering if we're living in a time that we're going to look back on here with an interesting lens, because last year, all we did throughout the course of the regular season was talk about how frustrating it was to have no non-conference games, to have no spring ball, and all these reps that these young guys didn't get. And it was like this excuse was building up a little bit, but you had Justin Fields, you had a stupid talented roster, and they gutted through it and made a special run and unfortunately didn't finish it off. So going into this year, spring ball was so important for these guys to start figuring it out. The beginning of the season, before you get into Big Ten play for the meat of the conference, this is a really important time developmentally for a young team. And for so many positions, we've seen a boatload of freshmen and first-year players that are sophomores, spending time out on the field. And yet at the quarterback position, you're only developing one guy right now. Now, that's not to say that next week maybe you don't see another guy, but I think the expectation was, as you pointed out, that fans sort of thought, okay, CJ might play the first half or the first 3 quarters, and then you'll see Kyle McCord or you'll see Jack Miller or whatever. And I just wonder if we're living in a time right now where we look back and say, gee, that COVID impacted year was actually more than 1 year on this program, because it's really hurt the development of this class. Do you feel that way?
No, it has. I mean, this is why it's so important for coaches. In the summer, you're stealing time to get skill development. Some of the biggest meetings you have as a coaching staff is with your strength staff. It's like, hey, what time can you afford us to get with the guys in the spring, in the summer, where you can work on fundamentals with these guys? These are fundamentals that these young players don't have. They have, what a lot of these guys that you recruit, have what mom, dad, and God gave them, and that's a talent that they have inherently. You have to, as a coach, to develop these guys from a skill set, and the way to do that is through those reps. And one of the things that flashed to me yesterday in the game is a guy like Cade Stover. And I know Cade Stover is not going to jump off the screen on a lot of other things. Cade Stover did some things fundamentally yesterday that were really good. And that's a testament to Kevin Wilson as well, being a tremendous football coach. But, he catches the football, he runs through the one defender, and everyone's like, whoa, yeah, he beasted that guy. What was great to see on the tight view was he had the ball chinned through the entire time of it. It was good fundamental football. He lifted his shoulders up. He had his eyes up. He was running the football. Like, it was good fundamental football to see from that standpoint. And even on the touchdown run down in the red zone with Travion, he sifted. And what that means is he was able to block the defensive end and work up to the safety at the same time and give that kind of placement. Those are things that he has because of the fact he's been there a little bit longer. He's been able to develop that a little bit longer. And really, the way you and I are talking right now, Brendan, during the pandemic, I was still coaching college football. That's how I was coaching guys and developing guys, literally on a screen like this, trying to find an open area in my house to be able to go through these guys with fundamentals, taking clips from the NFL, taking clips from the college game. And that's what Ohio State had to do with these guys. Until they actually get that kinetic learning of being able to do this on a regular basis, that's where it's going to come into play. And teams that have younger players are the ones that are behind because of this pandemic. There are veteran guys that have been coached that knew what they were doing. So we saw week one, Minnesota's offensive line had the most reps out of most game reps out of any offensive line in college football. That is why they were able to run the football so effectively in that game, because they had that integrity of taking those reps. And that's something that's going to go forward for Ohio State. And you say, looking back, Brendan, I hope we look back at this and go, man, CJ Stroud, man, we were really impatient with this kid. It turned out to be something really special. And like you said, what your eyes see, but also what we have not seen are what these backups could do in this situation. We haven't seen these guys yet. We've watched them play in high school. We've watched them do different things. But realistically, until you see that guy with that beautiful silver helmet on out there on Ohio Stadium surrounded by, the fans, surrounded by a great team, that's when you're going to know who these guys are. And those opportunities are going to present themselves going forward. Not saying that guaranteeing that CJ Stroud's going to get ahead in the game and be able to go sit down, but there are things that happen throughout a season where somebody else is going to have to play quarterback at a different time. And that'll be that guy's opportunity, whoever that may be, whoever Coach Day feels is the best guy to go in. He's going to go in, and when he has that opportunity, it's going to be really, really important for him to take advantage of it and show what he can do.
I don't want to get too far off topic here because I definitely want to talk about the turf, and I know a few of our comments are around that. But it has me wondering, without knowing the total ins and outs of Clemson's roster, if they're going through something similar that the Buckeyes are, new quarterback, young team, and going through the meat grinder right now where for as frustrating as the Buckeyes were at some points yesterday, Clemson looked even worse. They beat Georgia Tech, but by no means was it a resounding victory for a team that everybody has just accustomed themselves with thinking that, hey, this is a college football playoff perennial power. Let's talk about the turf for a moment. Without knowing future plans for what Ohio State is going to do for the turf, it's pretty clear. If you look up on Twitter, you can find pictures. People put side by sides basically of like, hey, what did this look like in 2014 and what's it look like now? And you could just see the coloring and how, weather worn the turf has become. I don't know if it's necessarily contributing to injuries, but I guess it's possible. But we've certainly seen some guys, lose their footing. It happened at Tulsa yesterday. I don't remember who had the ball, but somebody was racing up the left sideline and then bang. And you're just like, oh, that's a tough break. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about the challenge of playing on a surface that isn't a, softer, newer surface anymore.
Yeah, it's a multi-million-dollar industry that we're talking about at first. This synthetic turf that's been a godsend for a lot of athletic departments. And what's happening is Ohio State's playing lacrosse on there. They're playing, they're playing different sports there in the spring. So it's getting more reps than it traditionally probably would than just the 6 or 7 Saturdays that we are accustomed to in the fall. And the thing ages, and what happens is these companies will come back in, they'll try to make, repairs and different things. I've played on ones that were phenomenal as a coach and as a player. I've played on some that were just absolutely awful. And, yesterday, Deneric Price was the one that was up the sideline for Tulsa, number 8, their running back. He caught a ball and he took off and he ended up falling. And the turf monster got him. And why you say that is that there's times where you just kind of lose your footing in there. It's a combination of not only the turf, it's also the cleats. Part of the cleat game that you're seeing nowadays, and yesterday both teams were wearing different teams. Ohio State was wearing Nike. Tulsa is an Adidas school. Both schools are trying to find the fastest and the lightest cleat. And a lot of times what happens in the engineering is they're going back and forth between soccer cleats and football cleats to generate these light cleats for these athletes that are playing out in space. And what you see is those cleats that they're using are developed to go play on the pitch in Europe or whatever other area they're going to be in, which are these really short grass areas from that standpoint. So they're trying to figure out what's the best cleat to wear on that turf. I do agree. Ohio State is in an inning area, being in Columbus, Ohio. They do get to celebrate all 4 seasons of the year, and that really does weather a turf product. It's outside. They don't put a tarp over it in the off season. They don't go through that. I know when I coached at the University of Tennessee, grass. I mean, it was a topic of conversation every single week. Whenever you talk to a reporter, what do you think of the grass at Tennessee? Because guys were slipping and falling, and part of it was we had to find the right cleat. Our equipment staff did a great job working through and finding the right cleat for us to play on that surface at Neyland Stadium. So I think it's twofold. One, that turf does probably need repaired. I think Ohio State's going to have the money to be able to do that going forward. But right now, this is the turf they're going to play on this season. It's not like they're going to move it or go play somewhere else going forward with that. That being said, it's a disappointing investment by Ohio State that you put that much money into a product that really is only getting used in the fall for a walkthrough, probably on a Friday. In addition to that, also 6 or 7 games. It's not like Ohio high school teams are rolling in there every week to play games like it is at Nippert down the street or at Akron or Kent or whatever school you want to use. They're also allowing their facilities to be open to other schools. So obviously, whatever it is, it may even be under insurance where they're able to get that corrected. But it's disappointing to see young men work so hard in the offseason and work so hard in an investment in the game plan to see them not have the ability to execute because of potentially the playing surface that they're on.
I don't want to get too Tulsa focused here, but I admit, as I sort of prepared for the game this week, I expected them to give the Buckeyes a good fight. I didn't think Ohio State was going to only win by 3 touchdowns, which really felt a lot more like 2 because of a defensive score with, a couple minutes to go. Tulsa was kind of hard to get a read on because they lost to an FCS opponent. And so immediately you start thinking, all right, how for real could this team be? But I thought they played Oklahoma State pretty good. It wasn't a perfect game by any stretch, but I thought they gave Oklahoma State a good defensive effort. And I just sort of had that hunch coming into Ohio State that, they like to run the football, and they were going to try to do that against an Ohio State defense that was dead set all week on figuring out a way to stop the run after what happened the first couple games. What I did not expect was for Tulsa to throw for 428 yards. I was pretty impressed with Davis Brin. I think he throws a nice ball. But I also think that a good chunk of that 428 yards had a lot to do with the time he had to throw and, in general, the fairly soft zone coverage that Ohio State was playing, just allowing anything in front of them to get caught, make a tackle. And to Ohio State's credit, a much better job tackling in open space yesterday than they did the first 2 weeks. But, they essentially said, we're not letting anything go behind us, and that's that. So I think some of Tulsa's stats were inflated a bit. But I can see why Tulsa last year at 6-3 won 6 games in a row. All 3 of their losses were by a score or less, and why they gave Cincinnati a hell of a game in the American Championship, losing on a walk-off last-second field goal. I mean, that team was not – they are not a they're not a Sun Belt team. They're not a Mid-American Conference team. They were obviously not a Power 5 team, but they had some pretty good talent.
Yeah, they did. I mean, and you look at receiver yesterday, Josh Johnson and Juan Carlos Santana are really good receivers. And that was part of their game plan. And, the disappointing thing was, Brin comes into the game. He had not thrown a touchdown pass the previous 2 weeks. And I know that you did not watch a UC Davis game. I watched it live on a Thursday. As I watched 8,000 different games as I'm sitting at home.
Sicko.
Yeah, going through the different ESPN. They had 4 explosive plays that put them into the red zone called back because of either personal fouls, blocks in the back, stuff away from the play that wasn't germane to the result of the play, that really put them behind the 8 ball. The other thing is that Dan Hawkins at UC Davis does a tremendous job. Who was the head coach at Colorado. Fans may remember him from his rant about they get 2 weeks here. You go talking about college football, but Dan's back coaching FCS football, and one of the things that he alluded to when he got that job was that we're going to control the football. And go do that. So the question is, what isn't exactly an FCS team? It's your old 1AA. Youngstown State is the only scholarship 1AA school, or FCS school rather, in the state of Ohio. The difference between the two different schools is that you have 85 scholarships, 85 full scholarships at the Division 1A level. At the FCS level, you are allowed to cut those scholarships up. So those teams are given 65 full athletic scholarships. So they have less scholarships than the teams that they're playing. But what you can do is you can cut those up, and you can no longer, though, have more than 85 players on a scholarship roster there. But it's Division I football. A lot of it's bounce back guys, and especially those teams that have a little bit more seasoned guys at that level are guys that have been at different places and came back. When I was at Eastern Kentucky University, we were an FCS school. We had a quarterback named Tim Boyle, was the backup quarterback for the Detroit Lions right now. Tim's out with a hand injury, but he was a guy that was at UConn. He transferred into us and ended up having a great career. He's now in year 4 in the NFL.
Another good comment here. What stuck out to me most about Tulsa is they played mistake-free football and were very fundamentally sound. Again, I just want to clarify in case you didn't totally catch it. So when we're discussing FCS football here, that's not Tulsa. Tulsa is not an FCS program. We're talking about their Week 1 opponent, UC Davis. Tulsa plays in the American Athletic Conference with Cincinnati and Memphis and Houston and UCF for a couple more, I guess probably another year, and then those schools are off to the Big 12. But again, there are some FCS teams that will, like Mercer plays Alabama every year in an annual slaughtering. Mercer, that's another FCS school. But you're right. To this person who leaves this comment here, Treasure the Torah. What stuck out to me most: Tulsa plays mistake-free football, and yeah, they might not have the manpower, but I really thought they did a good job of just taking what the game gave them. And when you're playing on the road in, a tough environment, and Ohio Stadium yesterday was not exactly rocking. And in fact, I think they booed the Buckeyes a few different times. Not the typical home environment, but for Tulsa, it's still a tough place to come play on the road. Sometimes it's better to just take what the game gives you. Don't try to force the issue a little bit. I was very surprised that Tulsa kicked a field goal on their first drive of the game when what Ohio State's momentum was coming into that game, not much. And you basically stuff their offense after a few plays on Ohio State's first drive. And then as a team, Tulsa, 16 plays, 81 yards up the field. You melt almost half the first quarter clock off, and you choose to kick a field goal from the 5-yard line or the 3-yard line. I found that kind of interesting. I think I would have expected to see them play a little bit more aggressive there, but all things considered, they were a decent football team.
They were, and Brendan, you and I are on opposite ends of the coin on that one. I think you have 4 opportunities down there. You had 3 of them where you didn't get much. You were sitting there and you go, I got to come away with points. I think if you go down the field there and you don't come away with points, your team feels deflated. Those guys get to look up at the scoreboard. They're up 3-0 on the number 9th ranked team in the country. That's important to be able to do and to come away with that. And really, credit to Phil Montgomery and his staff. They played the short game. They played that field goal. They got 3. Ohio State answers with 3. They come back. They kick another field goal. So now you're sitting there and you go, okay, we're playing. We're going back and forth. And it gives you some sense of hope when you walk into that locker room. Because when you go into a game and you're that much of an underdog going into a game, you walk into the game and there's the unknown. You walk into the stadium in the unknown. And that first drive, as you go down the field and you take that much time off the clock, you come away with a field goal. Now it engenders hope. It engenders confidence, and you continue to do that going forward. I thought that was important. They are Tulsa's not a great football team. They're a good football team. They're fundamentally sound. They're going to execute. I thought they did a good job up front on their offensive line, considering they had some guys banged up, some guys that were out. They were able to go pick up, really, for the most part, the lack of pressure that Ohio State had developed early. And the zone coverage, there's going to be guys open. That's going to happen. When you design your throw game, that's what you design it for, is to cut up those different things. And really, Ohio State sat in that zone, kept the game in front of them, like we discussed yesterday. And I really kudos to them sticking to their game plan, not panicking, not trying to go over the top, because they knew they just didn't have the ability to do that. And really just take what the Buckeyes gave them and go forward with it. To atonement of 500 yards and you only get 20 points out of it. That's going to be a question mark that Phil Montgomery and his staff is going to talk about today, probably in their staff meetings. And really, as they're going forward, the Ohio State beat a team yesterday that most likely is going to play in a bowl game to be bowl eligible at the Division I level. You got to win 6 games. Unfortunately, they've lost their first 3, which puts them a little bit behind the 8 ball. But they should be able to make some headway in the American Conference against some other teams and really give themselves the ability to get where they need to be.
Let's move back to the defensive side of the ball here for our final couple minutes of discussion. We talked about the defensive line, and we've certainly sung the praises frequently of Denzel Burke, who I thought played tremendous again yesterday and got totally jobbed out of an interception. That was the most head-scratching overturned call on replay I've seen in a while, and I've seen a few. Cam Brown, who is clearly not 100%, played a whale of a game. Ronnie Hickman was very good yesterday. I thought Bryson Shaw actually played a little bit better yesterday than we saw the last couple weeks, so I was encouraged by the improvement there. But, man, I'm a little stuck on the linebackers right now. Cody Simon looks like he should be on the field pretty regularly. Palaie Neote, I'll get that perfectly one time here. He made one really, really meaningful tackle in the first quarter. We talked about this off-air, Coach. Tommy Eichenberg he's such a good dude. He's such a good kid. He didn't have a single tackle yesterday. I'm not sure how you have, a middle linebacker for Ohio State finish the entire game without a tackle. Now, some of that could be because of all the rotating personnel, but he's been out there a lot. This linebacker group, and obviously Taraja Mitchell didn't play much yesterday. I think he got in for a couple plays, but did not play much yesterday. This group, as a whole, they've got to start taking a step forward here. They've got probably one more week where, we can survive some growing pains in that unit. But, man, you get into Big Ten play again, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on that group to perform at a high level. There
is. Teams are going to pound them. They're going to run the football at this group, and they don't have that elite defensive line in front of them. And until they have that elite defensive line in front of them, they're not going to be able to go run and play. And I think one of the things that you look at as a Buckeye fan is look at, the linebacker core that the Buckeyes had last year. Lost a lot. Out of that core. And one of the things that I think people look at, there was 4 and 5-star guys behind him. Those guys didn't play. It wasn't they didn't play because there were blowout opportunities. It was just the Buckeye staff knew what they had behind him. They knew what they had in a tough Moreland, and then the guys that were in that system, they needed those guys on the field. Without those guys on the field, these guys that are playing for Ohio State right now don't have a ton of worry about that as we go through it, Tim. I love that. But as you're going forward, I think it's important to look at the ability that the Buckeyes have to have going forward to get some confidence in those guys. And when I talked about that stat, and Tommy Eichenberg had 0 tackles at Mike linebacker. You can't play a Mike linebacker position, have 0 tackles in a game. If you have 0 tackles in the game, hopefully what that means is that the defensive line is cleaning up everything else. Unfortunately, Hickman leads the team in tackles, and as you're going forward, there's going to have to be more production out of that room. They're still trying to figure it out. They're still trying to find out who the right guys are. And credit, like you said, Brendan, I thought Shaw played better at safety yesterday, but also he's a zone safety. They protected him a little bit more from that standpoint. And he's a tremendous athlete. I don't know if people give him enough credit. I mean, he was like an All-American lacrosse player as well. And he's got a lot of upside. What I love seeing about him yesterday was his ability when he was going for when the pick six at the end of the game, He led the way the entire way, and I thought was really something encouraging to see. It was good to see energy out of the defense in that perspective, and I think going forward, it's going to get better, and fans can go, well, it can't get much worse with what we've seen the last really 4 games now with this Buckeye defense. But like you said, Brendan, the linebacker group has got to play better, has got to make plays, and yesterday, Matt Barnes trying to get them going, trying to have the ability, like blitzing these guys and trying to get home on them. And, Eichenberg had the one hurry, wasn't as deliberate and as effective as they had hoped going forward. So that's something that's going to be really, really
right now of just general level of frustration. If you're not a football junkie looking at X's and O's, you think week 1, okay, you open with a Big Ten opponent and tough game on the road, freshman quarterback, first start, yada, yada, yada. Hey, we won by 2 touchdowns. Okay. And then a week 2 loss to a team that you really felt like is a good team, but you should have beat. But at least it's a non-Power 5. I'm sorry, another Power 5 team. You're still not, as a fan, you're not conditioned to losing those games, certainly under Ryan Day during the regular season. And then yesterday's game probably underwhelmed you a little bit. So I can understand the frustrations there. With all due credit to the Akron Zips, I don't think the Buckeyes are only going to beat Akron next week by 1 point. I think there's probably a different talent gap there, and I would expect Ohio State next week to look really good offensively. But we'll talk Akron later in the week. I think this is still time to make sure we kind of wrap up thoughts on Tulsa. Let's see if there's a couple of quick comments here before we get rolling. Tommy leaning too much on his high motor. Well, if you're in the wrong lane or a few steps slow every time, that high motor doesn't matter. I think he's talking about Tommy Eichenberg, not you, Tommy.
Yeah. No, either way.
Too much on your high motor, Coach.
No, and I agree with you. I agree with you 1,000%. He's got probably a little bit more equity in the facility because he's a guy that has been around a little bit longer around those guys. But I'm with you. You can't rely on motors. If a motor doesn't have gas, the motor doesn't produce, you're not going to use that motor anymore. I can have a Maserati in the driveway here, which I do not. But if you did and it didn't run, yeah, that's great. But at the end of the day, like, it doesn't run, you're not going to use it. So I can't agree with you more.
If you had a Maserati in the driveway and haven't given me a lift yet, we would have had a different kind of conversation. All right. Well, this has been, I think, a good little Sunday morning conversation about what we saw yesterday. And just a reminder for everybody, we've got literally content like this every single day of the week. Tomorrow we're going to do some film review stuff and talk a little bit about our grades for players this week. We'll have those grades posted within probably the next 12 to 24 hours at this point. Tuesday, we'll have a recruiting podcast called Building the Buckeyes, all the latest updates on the recruiting trail for Ohio State. On Wednesdays, we'll visit with somebody that covers Akron to give us a good idea of what Akron's team looks like. I realize that the record isn't great, but where they've seen some signs of progress. On Thursday, we'll dive inside the numbers, both for the upcoming matchup, but also maybe some wider numbers on the season. And then Friday we'll do a preview and prediction show and get ready for a first Saturday night home game of the season with the Zips and the Buckeyes coming to the shoe. For Tommy Zagorski, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks, guys, very much for joining us. Remember, if you don't watch us live on YouTube, you can find this after the fact anywhere you like to find your favorite podcast. We post it in lots of different places. If you're listening afterwards, know that you can join us. We stream all of our podcasts live on YouTube, and we'd love to hear from you. Thought we had great fan interaction and got to a lot of different comments and questions today. And if you haven't already, we'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. So please consider that. Talk to you guys real soon. The Buckeyes with a big win, 41-20, although it necessarily didn't feel like that yesterday.